Coming up on Point Spread Weekly, powered by the Vegas Stats and Information Network. We want to make you a better handicapper, and we've got plenty of sports wagering information. Join VSiN's betting experts and odds makers as they discuss sides, totals, money lines, props, and parlays, so you take sharper action. Cashing tickets is what it's all about. It's Point Spread Weekly, powered by VSiN, and it starts right now.
All right, welcome in Point Spread Weekly. We do it every single weekend here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network, and we write Point Spread Weekly every single week here at VSiN. So make sure you check it out. I tell you every single time you see this wonderful face and messy hair, VSiN.com/subscribe. VSiN Plus subs are free until 7 days after a major sport returns. You don't have to worry about anything in terms of monetary value. All you got to do is go to VSiN.com/subscribe and sign up. And not only do you get Point Spread Weekly, you get a lot of other stuff like live streams, replays, proprietary handicapping data, and much, much more. This week's edition of Point Spread Weekly, absolutely fantastic, loaded from top to bottom, well over 35 pages of content, ranging from Major League Baseball to racing, because we got a big race this weekend, right? And then much, much more. Steve Makinen, as always, who's not going to join us this week, unfortunately, by the way. He's always with us every single week. But there's something called vacation, and I guess Steve Makinen gets to take that every once in a while. But we have a great show on tap. Lou Finocchiaro is actually going to join us in just a couple of minutes as he takes stock before UFC is going to hit over at Fight Island the week after this weekend, which is going to be absolutely fantastic. 3 title fights on that card, which is going to be absolutely, 2 title fights on that card, a bantamweight title bout between Jan and Aldo, and then a great, I would say, title eliminator between 2 women's strawweight contenders, in Jessica Andrade and Rose Namajunas. But we're going to be joined by Lou. We're going to talk a lot about horse racing, of course, with Ron Flatter, who's going to join us as we continue our run for the Roses on Point Spread Weekly as we get ready, of course, for the Kentucky Derby. Not until September. And then Will Hill's going to be with us as we look at the divisions again with William, and we talk about the NFC North seemingly split into 2 tiers and what we're going to see from the NFC North and what William thinks from there. We're going to talk a little NBA, wrote a piece about these market power ratings in the Orlando bubble and what we're going to see and how, because look, lines are up, right? And you can sit here and you can go, okay, let's fire away. Let's bet sides. Let's bet overs. Let's bet unders. But the lines also tell you a lot of stuff that you need to know about where the odds makers think this bubble is going to come from a scoring perspective, about how these teams stack up in terms of the betting market, where the respect is, where the lack of respect is for certain teams. I'll tell you this right now, and we'll give it away. We'll talk about it again later in the show. There is one very, very popular team that I think is very overrated, and there is a team that is constantly disrespected, and that is, I think, going to be a bet-on team, has been a bet-on team throughout the NBA season. Both have equal future odds in terms of winning an NBA title. We'll talk about that when we get to the National Basketball Association. But our headline piece, of course, this week in Point Spread Weekly, centering on Major League Baseball and the fact that we are going to get, I think, a season for the ages. As Matt Youmans points out in the cover story, when you talk about this bizarre Major League Baseball season, the example will be made time and time again, which it should be, to kind of speak to how random this season will be. A 60-game season. Last year through 50 games, our defending World Series champ Washington Nationals were well under 500 and would not have made it into this postseason. So, again, opening the door for randomness, which is, I think, actually really intriguing, because from the standpoint of win totals for these 30-game seasons, how you can feel comfortable betting over a 35, 36.5 some of these good teams when the sample size is going to be so random and so short. How you'd be comfortable betting overs on a lot of these win totals would be very intriguing, but that's what Youmans writes all about. Dodgers, highest win total at 38.5, followed by the Yankees at 37. Bottom of the list, Baltimore and Detroit. Does the randomness include that Baltimore and Detroit are actually able to surpass win totals of 21? What's going to happen over a 60-game baseball season is going to be absolutely fascinating, and Matt Youmans takes that on, talks about it a lot in our headlining piece this week. Tuley's take on gambling in the United States, remember, and if you don't, it's fine, but of course our friends over at Circa opened up in Colorado earlier this week. How they handle that market, Colorado is going to be a fascinating market to keep track of when you have the European version of course, sports betting and those operators, when you have the Las Vegas, Nevada traditional market going in there. It's going to be for lack of a better term, war zone in terms of these operators and how they handle this market and who gets the dominant foot. But Tuley has takes on gambling in the United States. He's done a great job on that and doing his own way of keeping track of all the ponies, as well as Ron Flatter has. And also the top 10 list of NFL coaches. I heard the guys on Follow the Money earlier this week. They don't think a guy like Mike Tomlin should be in the top 10. Matt Youmans does indeed rank Tomlin within his top 10 at 8. I would say so as well. He's well within the top 10. When you're 3 games away from the postseason with Duck Hodges and Mason Rudolph as your quarterback, you get to be a top 10 coach in the NFL. But I digress because it is Point Spread Weekly here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. Let's dive right in. Lou Finocchiaro is nice enough to give us a couple of minutes and talk about the Ultimate Fighting Championship, what's going to come up this weekend. Lou, thank you very much for the time. You know I like to pick your brain on a lot of this stuff. But actually, I wanted to start with what we saw actually last time. That was a wonderful fight night card, Poirier and Hooker. But I'm just curious your thoughts on the fallout in the lightweight division of what happens from here with Poirier getting this really big win. We have yet to see, of course, what's going to happen at the top of the division with the title belt, of course, with Gaethje and Nurmagomedov. What do you think the fallout is here for Hooker and then for Poirier, most importantly, and what his next bout could be? Could it be Ferguson?
Well, that's really an excellent question. And I really try and think less about that until the UFC gives me a matchup that then I can handicap. But Hooker in the fight showed me more than I expected from him. Poirier, I think, had an off night, or perhaps Poirier starting to show some wear and tear of a really fine career. Hooker's going to have to work his way back. But in 2 fights now, we've seen Hooker tire in rounds 4 and 5. Mm-hmm. The Felder fight was a coin flip, and I don't regard Felder as highly as I regard Poirier. I was amazed with Hooker's mettle and his professionalism. I was also amazed with how calm Poirier was in the fire. Another 15 seconds on the end of round 2, and that fight might have been over. And I could have been really wrong on 2 positions instead of a 5-round decision making me right on 2 positions.
So I bet that one over as well. And I'm watching that fight. I'm with you. Like, I'm watching this fight in the second round. I'm like, this is over. I'm like, I'm not going to get out of this. They're just trading blows. There's no defense whatsoever, no trying to avoid significant strikes, and they're just opening up on each other. And then luckily, once they came out in the 3rd round, like, clearly they couldn't keep up that pace, and it really slowed down from there, and we know what happens. I want to ask you really quickly, too, because obviously you can learn when you look at fights and projecting guys forward. And, you know, there's certain guys where I'm watching, I'm like, okay, when I see them fight next, depending on who the opponent is, play on, play against. The one thing that stuck out to me watching the co-main event that weekend, Lou, if Mike Perry, and you tell me if I'm wrong, if Mike Perry runs into a guy who can actually stand and strike with some skill, I think he's in some trouble. Like Mickey Gall was piecing him up at times in the stand-up, and I just don't think the brawler style, take damage to deal damage, is going to work for him if he runs into a welterweight that can strike with actually some fluidity and also play defense.
I couldn't agree with that statement more. Mike Perry is a ballroom brawler, and he gets by with toughness, grit, and aggression. He's also, he beat Gall at grappling, and Gall beat him at striking. I could have never written that in my wildest nightmare. And so that's why we watch these fights. But Gall's got more to work on, but he's got potential. Perry's at his ceiling right now, and he's going to beat guys like Gall, but he's going to struggle against the top echelon of the division for the exact reasons you enumerate.
All right, so let's dive into Lou's piece, and we'll get details on, just some preliminary thoughts on 251 coming up next weekend. And, of course, Point Spread Weekly, Lou writes every single week, so you will have details on those fights next week as we get closer to the fight. So talk to us about the record for favorites. You mentioned this in your piece for Point Spread Weekly. I know Mitch has talked about this a couple of times on Follow the Money. Favorites have done pretty well since the start of the calendar year, correct?
63.3, so I'm tracking 114, 63, and 3 for favorites thus far in 2020. And last year, the favorites were really low, 62.3. But in years previous, JVT, the favorites ran in the high 65, so 65.8, 65.9, close to 66%. So we are having a better year. I tend to play with underdogs. We have much more competitive matchmaking coming from the organization and better skilled fighters, making it a wide open undertaking.
Yeah, I'm curious, and maybe you don't have these off the top of your head because obviously favorites winning at this clip, relatively impressive, but you also have some, because it's a fight game, right? Puncher's chance. We know we have that phrase. So we do have some big underdogs, taking some chunks out of this record. From a unit perspective, do you know how tight this is? Like, we know about how often the favorites are winning, but what are they up in terms of units?
Oh, that's a great question that I don't track. I track mine.
Yeah.
but I haven't put a number to that. And actually, now that you mention that, that's probably a pretty good undertaking. I may start the second half of this year being that the second half starts next week with 251.
Yeah, so we've had some meaty underdogs, as we know, win some of these fights, and like we said, it's a fight game, right, Lou? So sometimes you're going to get a favorite who just comes in and just takes a punch at a wrong angle and is going to collapse. Like, for example, 251 that's coming up, Rose Namajunas and Jessica Andrade. I think Rose Namajunas, she lost the first matchup. She was the favorite, I believe, by a pretty good size, about 2-1. It's going to happen. She gets dropped on her neck. It crunches a little bit. She gets knocked out immediately. But she's a 2-1 favorite again, and they're rematched for a reason. So you're going to get these upsets like that. We'll get thoughts on that in a little bit. So let's move on. A couple of other pieces, a couple of other nuggets from your pieces. Again, we're getting ready and getting set up for what's going to happen at UFC 251. When you talk about getting and taking advantage of underdogs, right? You don't want to blindly look at underdogs. It's just about matchups, right? Like, you want to look at matchups and how these guys match up, fight and stylistically. Styles make fights. So it's not about looking for underdogs specifically at certain prices, right? It's about these matchups when you're looking at.
It is. I oftentimes, if I'm going into right, I may think that I'm looking at fighter in the red corner before I do my due diligence, and I come up maybe picking the fighter in the blue corner for whatever reasons. There's so much that goes into it. That's why I love the game. Height, length, reach, size, expertise, how much you travel, what's your weight cut like, what weight are you taking the fight at. I try and take all of that into consideration. But I would say that if I can do two things each fight card, I think I'll be successful. Number one, beat the opening line. I use Pinnacle as my opening line. If I can beat the price on the opening line, number one. And number two, after beating the price on the opening line, I really want the underdog that's priced between plus 100 and plus 200. My due diligence with a partner I have that provides me keen analytics has made me understand that is the segment that I really try and keep a close eye on for my underdogs. The underdogs 200 to 500, you'll rarely see me play, and once in a while I'll take a flyer on a big bomber.
Yeah, it's something, I think I talked to you about this last time I spoke to you, but I'm getting more into using the UFC analytics and the stats as part of the handicap going forward with a lot of these fighters. And I watch all the fights too. You go back and you watch the fights because I think out of all the sports, right, Lou, like, you can really make math-based models and statistical models for a lot of these team sports. But when it comes to the UFC, styles make the fights. The stats are important as well. And I think this is one of those that I found over the last few months. It's a really good blend. Like, if you want to be successful, to blend the stats with watching these fights and seeing how these fighters approach each and every bout.
I think it would be impossible to do it other than what you just described. Right. I think if you just watch fights, you're going to be fine, but you have to understand the analytics because they mean so much by way of giving a fighter advantage in any particular kind of fight. That said, if you go pure at analytics, and that's where I found my little partner that feeds me the analytics. He's unbelievable with what he can provide me, but he hasn't been watching fights for 4 decades.
Right.
And so between the two of us, we have a really good combination, and the combination is experience and analytics, and I don't know how I could be successful doing this without.
All right, let's take a look at 251. And again, preliminary look, and we'll get more details next week if Lou's nice enough to give us a couple minutes on Points Spread Weekly. Again, all right, 251. Welterweight championship, Kamaru Usman, 170-pound title. Gilbert Burns, preliminary thoughts on what we're going to see in the main event next Saturday.
We're going to see two guys that know each other really, really well. I mean, Usman was in Burns' corner when Burns beat Woodley. Yep. So these guys know each other. They were boys. They trained together. I say were because as I begin to unfold the aspects of this fight, I'm going to key in on the mentality of what's happening with this friendship, which I believe will be a friendship no more. Usman's moved camps. I think there's a lot more going on here than meets the eye, and I think I have a lot to say about this fight, and I'm looking forward to breaking it down.
Yeah, Usman right now in the range of about minus 220, Burns plus 190, round prop of 4.5 over minus 160. By the way, I was going to ask you that too before we get to the rest of the fights. The other thing I found myself getting really into, Lou, is the round props. How involved do you get with the round props? You're more of a side guy.
I am more of a side guy, but I do track and scour the rounds because normally I think I have a feel for what that number should be. And in the Poirier fight, it was my thought that should be a 3.5. And fortunately for me, Poirier lasted through that second round and made me look smart. I'd say if I make 100 bets, a good 10 or 15 will be totals.
Yeah, the one that sticks out really in terms of that card too. Going back to the fight night really quickly, Brendan Allen, Kyle Dawkins. I bet that one over as well. It's a matchup of two grapplers. That one too. You get a little lucky because Allen was really working the ground and pound, but after that, Dawkins really showed. I think he's got a really bright future. Both of those guys are going to be a lot of fun to watch in the next few years. But that's another example of using some of the analytics, watching how much these guys operate though on the ground, as well as average fight times and things of that nature, and realizing that we could go over. And sure enough, it did. All right. Let's look at a couple of the other fights as we have on this card. Let's look at the second title fight. Preliminary thoughts from you. Max Holloway, Alexander Volkanovski. Volkanovski about -210 to Holloway's +180. You would think that this is one of those where there's going to be a lot of striking, standing on the feet, not much in the clinch, not much on the ground, correct?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, this fight to me looks like a Emmett Burgos, Poirier Hooker, Wang, Joanna kind of a fight. Yeah. I think we're going to see two kids in their prime. They're kids to me. Two young men in their prime, both completely prepared and ready to give their best. And I look for this to be as competitive a fight as it can be. And I think that maybe just early thoughts are that maybe the price on Max as a dog at 170 or 180 might be a little high. But I believe Volkanovski is the favorite, and it'll be interesting to see what Max does to change up what transpired in the first fight.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Defensively, I didn't think Max really performed very well in that first bout, but you get time to work on that and get ready and move on from there. Third title fight. Now, I misspoke. This is for an interim title, right? A vacated title, bantamweight title bout. Jose Aldo and Petrian. Right now, we're looking at Aldo. What are we looking at odds-wise for Aldo? I got in front of my screen right now, currently at about +170 to +190, depending on where you look in terms of the operator. What is the matchup here? And again, these are all priced somewhat similarly, right? You have your favorite in the range of 230, and then your underdog in the range of +180. But Aldo, in terms of results, Lou, has kind of been up and down over the last few years.
Though Aldo is only a 33-year-old man, I think he's quite a bit older than that. The drop to 35, I can't see how it's going to help him. I think that for whatever reasons, the UFC are awarding him this opportunity, but he's going to be overmatched against a kid 27 years old. Again, these two used to spar with one another. I think Peter Yan is in a really good position in this fight. That said, this is a total that I think is as skewed or as incorrect as potentially the Hooker-Poirier total. Mm-hmm. I believe this should be a 3.5 total. It's 2.5 currently, maybe 165 or 170, but it opened -101 to the over. Yeah. And the reason it got to its current price is myself and some other people were involved in that over early, and I still like, as long as that's 2.5, I like that over.
Okay, I like that. All right, we'll see if that moves. A couple of these round props for those who are watching, we do see some steam. The round prop I'm talking about, we mentioned between Dawkins and Allen, that got steamed up really well. Beginning of that week, it was -115, 120, closed at about -185. So these round props do move quite a bit when you're looking at the pricing on them. The other fight on this card, I'm very excited for it. I want to get your thoughts on it before we get you out of here, and any other thoughts on some prelim bouts or anything like that. Jessica Andrade, as I mentioned, strawweight bout versus Rose Namajunas. I thought Rose Namajunas in the first match, Lou, pieced her up in the first round. She opened her up in the first 60 seconds. Stand-up game, Andrade struggles with it from time to time. Weili Zhang's a really good striker, but Weili Zhang popped her up a couple of times in that win. Rose Namajunas did in the first round. Just got unlucky in the clinch, slammed on her neck, and she lost that fight. What do you make of the rematch here between these two strawweights?
My research in this fight revolves specifically around checking Rose's mental frame, and thus far, what I've uncovered has all been very, very positive. I read it like you do, JVT. I think that Rose was controlling distance, piecing her up, and fighting her fight, looking great, and she made a mistake. And I think she's had time enough to work through that. I think she comes mentally prepared. And though I really was having strong Andrade thoughts early in this fight, I may be backing off of that a little bit. And really, when we look at these top 4 fights, I'm having a hard time coming up with an underdog that I really, really like at this point in time.
Yep. By the way, because we talked about that Jessica Eye, Cynthia Calvillo fight card as well. When you talk about mentality of fighters, some MMA writers had talked about Jessica Eye being mentally a little bit off and different than she usually had been in terms of camps. We saw what happened in the weigh-ins as well, and then she goes out and is completely flat in her fight against Cynthia Calvillo. So to your point, Lou, it's really important not only to look at these stats-wise, but to follow the weeks leading up, how these weigh-ins are, how these weight cuts are going, what the mentality is like of fighters, because you will get somewhat of an indication of how they will perform once they get to the ring. I thought I would take advantage of the weight cut deal and the fact that people were overreacting and bet up Calvillo, and sure enough, it burned me. But this is really important when you're handicapping this. It's a little bit different because they're individuals. You can get a sense of their emotion as opposed to team sports and entire teams, right?
Well put, Jonathan. Listen, when I is a nasty woman.
Yeah.
And when you see her wan, pale, timid, and shaking on a scale, that's not mean. That's not Junkyard Dog. And so you knew right there. And so people ask, why do I watch these weigh-ins?
Sorry, I got to cut you off. We're up against it. That was my fault. But yes, watch the weigh-ins. That's the lesson. Lou Finocchiaro, Gamblu on Twitter. We will catch up with him next week, and we'll be back here on Point Spread Weekly. All right, welcome back in. It is Point Spread Weekly here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. We're going to have Ron Flatter in just a couple of minutes. We'll talk a little bit about the horses. But right now, let's head out and not waste a minute. William Hill, nice enough to give us a couple of minutes. Headline, NFC North seems split into 2 tiers. Will, give us the lowdown here. What are the 2 tiers in the NFC North at this point?
Well, what's going on, JVT? Well, the bookmakers, they kind of drawn a line in the sand here. They got the Vikings and the Packers, depending on where you shop, both under 2-1. And then if you want to get a little frisky, you got the Bears around 4-1, and then the Lions around 7-1. So that they've shown their hand there. They think, the Vikings and Packers, who have won 7 of the last 8 divisions, that one of those 2 teams will prevail this year.
Where's the edge for you between those 2 teams?
Man, it's a toss-up. I'm down on Green Bay. So I will lean towards Minnesota.
Yeah.
I think Green Bay was totally misleading. That 13-3 record, you look at it and think, wow, it's a dominant team. But you dig deeper, and they were far from dominant. Yards gained versus yards allowed, just about even. Points scored versus points allowed, just about even. So I would lean Minnesota. I trust Zimmer. Zimmer's been one of the best coaches, I think, tied with Belichick since he entered the league for best record against the spread since entering the league. So I lean Minnesota in that division.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how much you use like the DVOA metrics, but it was a well-known stat last year, Will. Green Bay, the second worst 13-3 team in terms of DVOA that we have seen. The other was the 13-3 Indianapolis Colts in Peyton Manning's second year. They had made the jump from 3-13 the year prior to 13-3 in the postseason. So again, according to some other metrics, one of the worst 13-3 teams we've ever seen were the Green Bay Packers. When you looked at Minnesota, my question for you is, because I would agree overall, I think this team does have the edge. My question comes with the exodus of talent, and I guess some of them are just names for the most part, but the defense does lose quite a bit in terms of some of the names that have been very productive over the last few years. And the other part is, do we see a similar offense that is really relying on Dalvin Cook? Because we saw a difference when Cook wasn't in the lineup at the end of the year, and sometimes when the running game isn't going, this offense does get stuck in neutral.
Yeah, I think that's a fair concern. And the other fair concern would be, the circumstances of the virus. And they drafted 15 guys. A lot of them are going to be key roles, 2 first-round picks. They're replacing basically their entire secondaries in Cincinnati, and your guys got Xavier Rhodes. Good luck with that.
Yeah.
I mean, he can't cover anybody. He was a great player, an underrated player for a short time, but he just, unless he rediscovers something physically, he just can't run anymore. But that's beside the point. But they're going to have to really develop these guys quickly. Without an off season, without a preseason, you're just throwing these guys into the fire. Now, I talked to Lombardi a lot. Lombardi loves the draft. He loves the kid Lynch from Baylor. He says some of the corners can play. But you're asking Zimmer to develop these guys without a lot of time to develop, and I think that is an issue. And also home field, that dome is noisy. That dome is a factor. Without fans, I don't know how much of a factor it is.
Yep, very true. All right, let's go to a prop that you have written up here. I like this a lot. It's funny. Before last season started, William, there was a lot of talk about sharp bettors really liking the Detroit Lions. Analytically, a lot of stuff stuck out. Thought they were an undervalued team. Got off to a pretty good start, but then Stafford gets hurt. I actually kind of like what this Lions team brings to the table. If Stafford comes back and he's anywhere near what he was last year, which was absolutely fantastic, 8.6 yards per attempt, they were winning games with him as their quarterback. They fell into some bad luck. The Lions to make the postseason, you're going yes?
Yeah, I think that's a great number. Plus 290, plus 325, it varies like all these do. But, I mean, people forget because the end of the season was so bad, but it took a Patrick Mahomes drive in the last minute. Otherwise, the Lions are entering October undefeated. Now, they let the Cardinals game slip away. They're up 24-6 late. They ends up as a tie. They get robbed on Monday night with those 2 personal fouls against the Packers. That ends up in a loss. And then they lose last minute to the Chiefs. And then once Stafford gets hurt, I mean, look, they were guilty of something a lot of teams are guilty of. They don't have a backup quarterback. So and even Driscoll got hurt. But I don't know how much of a difference he would have made. But I think if Stafford was healthy, they're right around, right in the mix for 8-8, 9-7, that last wild card spot. They're very good on offense. I mean, if you look at Galladay, Jones, I'm not a fan of taking a running back that high in terms of the long term, but running back is one position where a guy can come in and compete right away and sort of keep that defense off the field. The defense is not good, all the Patriots cast-offs. But they're going to be really good on offense, and I like them at that number.
William Hill, again, you can check the piece. NFC North split into 2 tiers. There's also some Week 1 plays in there that you can check out. NFC North related as well. We don't want to give away everything because you should subscribe for Points Weekly and check out William's work. William, we're up against it. Thanks a lot for the time, man. We'll talk again next week, okay?
See you, JVT. Thanks, buddy.
Yep, again, at @NotTheWillHill up on Twitter if you want to get some of the analysis in person up on social media. But, yeah, I would be totally down with that. Lions to make the playoffs plus 320. I think this team's going to be a lot better. If Matthew Stafford is healthy, we're playing all 16 games. And, again, remember, extra spot in the postseason up for grabs next year, too. So, all right, when we come back, the run for the Roses. Ron Flatter joins us. There is a new Wise Guys horse. He'll tell you which horse it is. Welcome back into Point Spread Weekly here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. Always will remind you, VSiN Plus subs are free until a major sport returns and 7 days after as well. So, you make sure you check that out. Don't have to worry any payment. VSiN.com/subscribe. PSW free and available every Wednesday at 10 a.m. Pacific time. Uncle Chuck draws Wise Guys interest. That is the headline of the piece for Ron Flatter, who's with us right now here on Point Spread Weekly. Ron, thank you as always. I always love talking to you about these sort of things. So before we get to the horse itself, explain to me, at the top of the piece, what we're talking about here when you're setting this up in terms of betting the Kentucky Derby future wagers, the betting pool, the time limit. What is it that you're talking about here at the beginning of your piece?
Normally, John, we talk about the Las Vegas futures, fixed odds wagering. When you buy a future for the Kentucky Derby, you can do it 24/7, and the odds you see are the odds you get. They're not parimutuel. Parimutuel odds are like betting a horse race, and so when you do that, the Kentucky Derby and the people that run it, Churchill Downs, a few weekends a year and a few more because the Derby was postponed, will put up this wager for 54 hours from a Friday until a Sunday, and you bet into it. But it's like a horse race. The later you wait to go ahead and place your bet, the more likely that the odds you see are going to be the odds you get. And so there were about $200,000 bet into the win pool last weekend. but 15% of that came in the last hour. That's when the wise guys are going to come in, and they were waiting to see if there were any overlays. You mentioned Uncle Chuck, the Bob Baffert horse that's going to be racing Saturday in the Los Alamitos Derby. He's raced only once, was very impressive in his debut, and so he got bet down, and he got bet down pretty heavily in the final hours as he went from 20-1 all the way down to 13-1 when the clock struck 0. And so you compare that to what you're getting in Las Vegas. Okay, well, Uncle Chuck 13-1 at the Kentucky Derby Future Wager Parimutuel. You can still get him at 16-1 at Circa, 15-1 at William Hill. So you wait, you try to get an overlay, and even then it still got bet down.
So what is it? Because obviously you and I have been doing these spots for a while now. By my recollection, this is really the first time we've talked about Uncle Chuck. So like, did something change over these last few weeks that all of a sudden there's some interest here, or is it just the setup of the pool and all of that, and that's why wagerers are getting involved with him, or is there something that we should know about that's happened?
Well, he raced for the first time last month. That was the big thing.
Okay.
He's a Bob Baffert colt. Bob Baffert's won the Kentucky Derby 5 times, and so immediately you look at him and you say, all right, that's why people are betting into it. And so really that's the thing. He will be racing this weekend in the Los Alamitos Future Derby, I should say, and that is a race that gives 20 points to the winner to get into the Kentucky Derby. Not enough to qualify alone to get into the race, but if he shows well there, Baffert's going to move him along to a more serious prep later on this summer. And so that's why people are trying to get in now, because if he wins big tomorrow, you're probably not going to see double-digit odds on him anymore.
Really quickly, what's that field like? What can we expect with that race tomorrow?
Very small field. There's another Baffert horse in there, 1,000 Words. He'll take some of the money. Another horse named Anno D'Or, and then a couple of space fillers. So it's a small field. It could be, if the chalk holds, it could be just a paid workout for Uncle Chuck.
Okay, all right. So we'll go back, and I think, actually, to be honest with you, Ron, so one of the coolest things I think that horse racing does, and I have yet to be failed by this, is if you don't watch the race live, YouTube is a treasure trove for watching every single one of these races that you missed. Like, if you haven't seen any of these horses live, you can go, and that's where I've done a lot of my research, because, like, I'm trying to get a little bit better at this as we do these spots with you. I am amazed by the races that are available that I can go back and watch horses race multiple times when I haven't seen them.
That's the best part. The races don't take long. You can go back and see, wait, where did the move happen in the race? It's the easiest thing. And when you're handicapping races, no excuse not to go back and just go beyond the trip notes you see in the past performances and click the video, because the race is gone. JVT, you can go back for decades, pick a race, and boom, there it is.
So, by the way, you end this before you get to your derbies, your derby futures, who's hot and who's not. So, is Uncle Chuck worth betting now? The question you pose in your final graph before getting to who's hot and who's not. So, I'll pose that question to you for our audience. Is he worth betting now?
If you think he's going to win the Kentucky Derby, you're not going to get a better price than now. But we have a long way to go. And even his trainer, Bob Baffert, said, hey, look, it's amusing to see this, but he wouldn't make that bet. Yeah. If this horse, though, wins on Saturday impressively, you're not getting these odds again. You just have to make sure he gets to the gate, gets through the summer qual, all those other things. But this is as good a price as you're going to get.
All right, we do it every week. So Derby futures, we'll start with who's hot, and we should note too, as if you read these pieces regularly, Ron not only now has up the fixed futures of Circa, William Hill, but you also have these the Kentucky, the KDFW, as you put them on there in this piece as well, right? That'll be included from here on.
Yeah, well, that's actually when they do the weekends for Churchill Downs does have the parimutuel, so it shows up right now because we just had it. Creed, hot horse, but not really so. Things change by the minute. This horse won yesterday at Belmont Park, but his trainer, Shug McGay, he said, probably not going to go to the Travers, probably then won't go to the Derby. So even beyond what you see on your screen, he's drifted now. 75-1 at Circa, 120-1 at William Hill. So as we were walking up to doing this, yeah, he was hot. Not so hot anymore. Max Player, he was 100-1 last month, moved up 6 places to finish third in the Belmont Stakes, so that's why his odds have been cut. Haskell, that will be his next race in July on the Jersey Shore. Dean Martini, I think, overrated right now. He won the Ohio Derby. He was over 7 just before that, and then he's won a couple since. He'll go to the Ellis Park Derby next. I think he's actually a minor league horse in this whole conversation. And who's not? Storm the Court, last year's juvenile winner. He's 0 for 4 since. Tap It to Win. He was a pace setter that faded to 5th in the Belmont Stakes, and he's lost 3 stakes by a combined 78 lengths. Wow. And Rushy, 104-1 in the parimutuel after finishing a distant third in the Santa Anita Derby. I don't even know why he was included in the parimutuel wager. I don't think he's on the Kentucky Derby trail at all anymore.
It's interesting. Am I misremembering this? Wasn't Tap It to Win going into Belmont one of those like sneaky sharp horses?
He was the second choice.
Yeah.
He was going to set the pace, and I think a lot of folks thought, look, a pace setter could go ahead and steal the race on the front, but he had some excuses for his previous stakes failures, but he's out of excuses now.
All right, I like it. Ron Flatter, again, joins us every week here on Point Spread Weekly as we go over the road to the Kentucky Derby, which is now a little bit farther back than it has been in years past. Ron, before we get you out of here, let us know what's going on in the Ron Flatter Racing Pod. I think this is going to be one of the I'm really excited, actually. I haven't listened yet, but it's on my list of, after my NBA podcasts, your latest editions of the Ron Flatter Racing Pod. Seems like some really good conversations, but what do you got up?
It's about race and racing. Equibase President Jason Wilson, Fox's Jonathan Kinchin, Greg Harbutt, a bloodstock agent who owns his own company, National Thoroughbred Racing Association's Alicia Hughes. They discuss the challenges for Black Americans in racing. So it is one where we're trying to find out if the race can become more diverse than it has been in over 100 years. And Rampart's Dwayne Colucci helps us preview the Met Mile and the Los Alamitos Derby. The Ron Flatter Racing Pod at vsin.com/podcasts or wherever you get podcasts. And it's sponsored by First Bet.
Ron, you are a professional as always. We are up against it. Thank you for spending a couple more minutes with us this week, and we will talk next weekend, okay?
All right, thanks, JVT.
You got it. Ron Flatter, again, doing a great job. Those are some of my favorite pieces in Point Spread Weekly. All of them are my favorite pieces. And mainly it's my favorite piece because I think Ron is still connected. But regardless, yes, Point Spread Weekly, it is free until the major sport returns. Check it out at VSiN.com/subscribe. We dive into the NBA when we return. Welcome back into Point Spread Weekly. Last few minutes here on VSiN, the Sports Betting Network. We will remind you, as always, that VSiN Plus subs are free until a major sport returns. If you like the content you watched today, if you like any of our other content, it will behoove you to sign up for Point Spread Weekly and our VSiN Plus subs because they're free until a major sport returns. So, last weekend, something big happened. If you've paid attention to the network at all, you know how much I enjoy the National Basketball Association. Well, last Friday, they announced the schedules. Odds were then subsequently posted for those games, sides and totals by odds makers and operators around not only the country, but around the globe. So, we finally had something tangible for the NBA to look at in terms of point spreads. Now, again, if you paid attention to the edge whatsoever, which, like, come on, let's face it, you have. We go through these market power ratings. Market power ratings, and what I wrote about today, this weekend's edition of Point Spread Weekly, I should say this week's, is using these market power ratings, deciphering what they are, and then using them and how you can use them in your tools. Now, for the NBA, we only rated the 22 teams, the only 22 available, so we can throw these up, and you can check out our market power ratings up to this point for the NBA, because it's important to see where they are grouped and where people feel like they are rated in terms of the market power ratings. So, right now, at the top, it's not really surprising that the Milwaukee Bucks, the Los Angeles Lakers, are at the top of these power ratings because the market has a high respect for them. They've been near the top in terms of the futures market throughout the entire regular season, and they're going to be there for a while. So your top two teams, Bucks and Lakers, followed by the Clippers on the 86 line. The Raptors sitting at 84, followed by the Celtics and a glut of teams at the 82 line. Celtics, 76ers, Mavericks, and Nuggets. So let's start with this. Because the question you ask yourself if you look at these numbers is, okay, well, how do I use these? Because if you calculate point spread from these, it's going to be the point spreads that you see up on the boards. This is where it's important to have your own set of ratings to see where the market stacks up these teams as opposed to where you stack up these teams. I'll give you a good example. So when they opened the lines for these games, the Utah Jazz opened up as a 1-point favorite over the New Orleans Pelicans. I, personally, had the New Orleans Pelicans rated higher than the Utah Jazz. I should note, I did not have the Pelicans as high as the market does, which we'll get into in a moment, but I did have the Pelicans rated higher than the Jazz. I had the Pelicans as a 1-point favorite over the Utah Jazz. So when I saw that, I thought, market's offline, it's going to correct itself. Sure enough, the Pelicans get back to the point where now they're a 2-point favorite across the board, and if you throw up those power ratings right there, you'll notice that there is a 2-point difference between the Pelicans and the Jazz. Pelicans sit on the 81 line. and the Jazz sit on the 79 line. And so that's why, again, you can get this range of this betting market. You can see where the market feels about certain teams. You put them up against your ratings, and you can see where you're going to find value. So let's talk about the Pelicans for a second, because I focused on two teams for part of this piece, and we'll get into the total shortly. But the New Orleans Pelicans, I think, are a really fascinating case study in terms of a team that is really and clearly highly respected by the market, but maybe a little overvalued. And it all kind of stems, right, from January 22nd. What happened on January 22nd? Well, Zion Williamson made his NBA debut, if you remember, against the San Antonio Spurs, hit a whole bunch of threes, even though, again, they left him wide open because they were like, dude, you're not going to hit these consistently. He did that night. They go on to win that game. But let's talk about this from that perspective. So, the New Orleans Pelicans from January 22nd on, it's amazing because they're a very, very heavily bet team by the public, and yet over that stretch, they were only 11-9 straight up, 10-9-1 against the spread. ATS numbers are a good indicator, right? If you are regularly covering spreads as a team, you're pretty much undervalued by the market. We're going to get to one of those teams in a moment. But if you're a team like the New Orleans Pelicans, who are consistently getting bet and over a 20-game sample size, you're only 10-9-1 ATS. That's not an insanely high clip. Thus, the market might be a little too strong on you. But there's also tangible examples of that. Go back to March 1st. The New Orleans Pelicans played host to the Los Angeles Lakers. Anthony Davis did not play. The New Orleans Pelicans closed as 1.5-point favorites at home over those Los Angeles Lakers. Yes, without Anthony Davis, they're not 1.5 points better at home than the Los Angeles Lakers with LeBron and without Anthony Davis. Now, if it was flipped and Anthony Davis was playing and LeBron wasn't, then you can make a case for the Pelicans to be favored by a point and a half on their home floor because the net rating with LeBron off the floor, AD on the floor is actually negative for the Los Angeles Lakers. Regardless, I digress. 1.5-point favorite they close at home against the AD-less LeBron Lakers. And guess what? LeBron and the Lakers end up winning that game despite the fact that the New Orleans Pelicans closed as 1.5-point favorites. One more example. The Milwaukee Bucks played them back in February 4th. The Milwaukee Bucks were in New Orleans. The Milwaukee Bucks were 6-point underdogs on February 4th, 6.5-point underdogs, I should say, and the New Orleans Pelicans were 6.5-point underdogs to the Milwaukee Bucks. The Milwaukee Bucks won that game 120-108. Okay, so again, on their home floor, 6.5 points worse than Milwaukee. They lose that game by double digits. You look at these market power ratings one more time, and you realize that the market has dictated that the Pelicans on a neutral in Orlando would only be 6-point underdogs. So again, taking in home court into this consideration, you're telling me that in February, the New Orleans Pelicans were 6.5 points worse at home against Milwaukee, but now here we are in July, and they're only 6 points worse on a neutral against the Milwaukee Bucks, meaning if they were playing Orlando, it would be a 3-point spread. What changed? And that's what you have to do. That's what you have to do when you look at some of these numbers, when you look at these market power ratings and where these teams stack up. There is a 3-point difference in the power rating for the New Orleans Pelicans from February to right now. And remember, there's a massive pandemic hiatus in between where they don't really get better. Teams, don't lose players. We know the Milwaukee Bucks and New Orleans Pelicans, as it stands right now, to what we know, are going to be at full strength. So why did the New Orleans Pelicans get 3 points better? Well, the market just bet them. And that's why these sort of things are important. So to me, the New Orleans Pelicans slightly overvalued when you're looking at the way that they stack up in the market. And I'll give you another example. We can tie it into a team that is undervalued. New Orleans Pelicans are 60-1 to win an NBA title. They have to fight their way into the postseason, right? They're 3.5 games back at the 8th seed. Remember, you only have to get to within 4, and then you can force a play-in. But they're not in the postseason as it stands right now. Plus 250 to make it into the Western Conference. That 60-1 is similar, actually equal over at the Westgate, to the Oklahoma City Thunder, who are also 60-1 to win in the postseason. The Oklahoma City Thunder are a team that has routinely been underrated by the market up to this point. And some good examples, again, like we talked about, ATS numbers are a really good example of how a market feels about a team. If a team is consistently covering spreads, they're undervalued by the market. How about some of these teams for the Oklahoma City, some of these numbers for the Oklahoma City Thunder? 39-24-1 against the spread during the regular season, 61.9% cover rate. Thunder, 23-8 against the spread. That's 74.2% cover rate on the road. 26-13-1 ATS. That's 66.7% against the Western Conference. 23-10 ATS. That's 69.7% as an underdog this season. The Thunder, in multiple categories, are covering well over 60% of their games because the market has consistently undervalued them. And again, you look at the market power ratings one more time, and you realize that the Thunder, according to the betting market, are on the same line as the Grizzlies, which means if they were to play the Grizzlies in Orlando, it would be a pick. They are 1 point worse than teams like the Heat, the Trailblazers, and those Pelicans that we just talked about. And 2 points worse on a neutral than the Celtics, 76ers, Mavericks, Nuggets. You can do the math from there as you see those numbers in the couplets that we're talking about. But that's the thing. Like, even the Trailblazers are a fascinating case study. The Trailblazers, we're talking about a team with the 24th ranked defense in the National Basketball Association, a team that, yes, is getting healthy, but we don't know what the effects of those guys all playing together are going to be. We haven't seen them all together this season. So the market is assuming that a healthy Trailblazers team is actually better than an Oklahoma City Thunder team that is currently the 5th seed in the Western Conference. And so that's why doing this sort of exercise is relatively important for you as a handicapper. Getting a gauge on how the market feels about certain teams and comparing how the market feels to what your ratings say is a great way to find value. So those are two teams, right? One team a little overrated, one team a little underrated. The other fascinating aspect about what came out last week in terms of the sides and the totals, and this has been covered multiple times, Follow the Money talked about it, we talked about it on The Edge this week, but it is the effect of the bubble, playing on a neutral, playing in front of 0 people, and the totals, right? The extreme example, of course, is the Bucks-Celtics game. We've talked about it multiple times, so I'll skip to the next one, the Rockets and Mavericks games, okay? And the graphic you're watching right now, you see the matchup, Rockets and Mavericks, the total that was posted at open, which was 225.5, the regular season average closing total between those two teams when they met up, which was 233.5. You're talking about a difference of 8 points. A total that was posted on Friday, 8 points lower than the regular season average closing total between those two teams. So again, we talked with Brian Windhorst earlier this week. There is likely going to be a depression in scoring when they play in Orlando. I personally think the communication is going to be better defensively. Obviously, we could talk about the lack of energy. I'm not really big on playing psychologist, but playing, with a lack of energy, with lack of crowd, when you hit a big three, things like that, pushing you and driving you forward, it'll make a little bit of a difference. The question you have to ask yourself is a difference and an adjustment from the regular season of nearly 8.5 points for a game like Celtics and Bucks, or 8 points in a game like Rockets and Mavs, or 7.3 points between the Clippers and the Lakers, or 6.1 points, between the Clippers and the Lakers, and 7.3 points between the Pelicans and the Clippers. Is that an adequate adjustment, or is it too extreme? Because now you can make the case, and I talked about this in Niche Bots earlier in the week. Is there a case to be made, right? If you're a team that is coming into the bubble, and let's just throw effort out of the window. Let's say both teams want to win the game, okay? Do you slow a game down when you're uncomfortable as a team, or do you try to get out and transition and get easy buckets and get guys in shape and start to go and start to run a little bit more, thus the pace picks up? But at the same time, if pace picks up and your game is not on the same level as it was because of the long layoff, does that lead to a lot of quick possessions and empty shots? And so these, as a handicapper, I don't have the perfect answer for those, but those are the questions that you have to answer as a handicapper when you're looking at this. You know that the odds makers think that there's going to be a very big difference in the scoring when they get to Orlando. It's baked into those totals right there. So if you came in thinking, I'm betting these games under, there's going to be some value. I mean, there's not that much value, because a matchup like Bucks-Celtics, the total is 8.5 points lower, essentially, than it was in the regular season. Say it all the time. If you know it, they know it, and it's clearly baked into these numbers and totals in the NBA. All right, with that, we're all done here on Point Spread Weekly. Remember, I say this all the time. I know you're probably sick of it because you see me and I think you repeat it in your head. VSiN Plus subs are free until a major sport returns, and we'll never let you forget that. This week's cover story on Major League Baseball, the randomness of a 60-game season. Youmans does a great job with that. Also has his top 10 coaches in this week's edition of Point Spread Weekly. Tuley's got his takes. Haven't even talked about Josh Applebaum's piece. More on Ron Flatter's piece. We get to everything. Same with William Hill as well. So VSiN.com/subscribe. It's not just Point Spread Weekly. It's VSiN Plus subs, which are replays and live shows, all for you if you sign up for it. So check it out. VSiN.com/subscribe. With that, we will see you next weekend.